as something of a proud Finishman. It is the greatest desire of my adult blood to see the fulfillment of the natural borders of my fair nation. I kid, of course. I have no semblance of national pride for this godless excuse of a state, or really for its people, but that is entirely a different matter. Let's suppose for a moment that one would like to reforge a greater Finland. How would one go about this, and first and foremost, what would one wish to achieve precisely? At the heart of any irredentist ideology is the populace of a nation. Now to Finland, these are the traditionally Finnish peoples, or tribes, which are, as modern Finland houses them, the tribes of Häme, Suomi, Pohjanmaa, Savo, Lappi, and Länsi-Karjala. Now unto this list one could add a myriad more tribes, but to stay within any resemblance of reason and of historicity, let's entirely rule out the Finnic peoples not conjoined to Finland proper via land. That leaves us with an extent of peoples from the Scandinavian mountains all the way to the west to the Onega and to the south to the Latvian border. By all accounts, this is a delusional, senseless fantasy as well, as the Sami and the Estonians hardly speak Finnish. And more importantly, as these borders lack any naturality to them. No mountains, no rivers or seas at its edges to shelter the core of the nation. That is to say, they lack natural defensibility and order. So to fulfill these ends, let's do like a scene girl and restrict. First of all, the southeast. Where to draw the line? I have but a simple answer to part with for a simple question. At the three isthmuses, or isthmai, as Finnish irredentism knows them anyway. An isthmus is a narrow piece of land surrounded by water. Here the three are the Karelian, the Ladogan and the Onegan. The former two have their extent cut off by the rivers Neva and Syväri, but the third one rather lacks such a water connection, and thus should be mostly a straight line between the nearest minor lakes all the way up north, from Onega to the White Sea. To suppose the border thus lit does exclude the Estonians, Ingrians and the Webs, granted, but any inclusion of these peoples forces an unnatural border on flat land against Russia, as well as includes two liberally different people within the Finnish ones, namely the Estonian. Should the others wish so, they can of course merely move to a welcoming homeland on the other side of the border. Moving northward, the White and Arctic seas provide a great natural border to our Finland, as we include White Karelia and the Kola Peninsula. But as we begin to approach the Scandinavian mountains, as we are going anti-clockwise to the west, we face another problem, that of those pesky Norwegians. In Norwegian Finnmark live a broadly Finnish tribe of Finnic speakers, the Kven, and worse yet, they live rather scattered through the regions amidst Norwegians. No matter, we'll compromise and draw a border at around the 27th meridian east, and all those who will shall emigrate accordingly. Now onward to our last border to discuss, that is, with the Swedes in the Torneo River Valley. We're bravely just throwing in the towel here because there's nothing short of tundra here, and simply including half of Haaparanta, Ylitornio, Pajala and Kiruna from what is nowadays Sweden into our Finland. With that, the continental borders are secured, and we can see that circling counterclockwise the Baltic Sea protects our supposed Finland for the rest of the way. I'll also note briefly that Ahvenanmaa, that is Åland, is a point of controversy, as it is a chiefly Swedish-speaking region. Take it or leave it, honestly, I vote for the latter. Now all that's left is to fulfill it, to make it happen. Greater Finland, that is. Now there's no possibility of such a Finland being achieved in the near future anyway, so let's go back in time to 1917. Initially we shall suppose a rather similar course of events. Finland declares its independence from a crumbling Russian Empire in December 1917, and rather immediately falls to civil war between the Whites and the Reds. That is, the monarchists and republicans versus the socialists and the communists. A civil war won by the Whites with German assistance. Where we shall drive our wedge to our timeline though is in the treatment of the Reds post-war. Following the civil war in our timeline, the victorious Whites took a rather merciful stance on the Reds, which was ultimately beneficial to keeping a sense of unity within the nation. Well, certainly as the Winter War came about. Here though, we shall suppose a more stern stance from the victors. The White Terror, as it were, goes into full and brutal effect after the Civil War. Nearly all of the thousands of red prisoners are either executed or left to starve in inhumane prison conditions, and socialism is outright banned in Finland. Socialist support, of course, does not wane, but instead fractures. The Social Democrats split into the underground communists and the parliamentary Christian socialists, the former of which at best carries some 10% popular support, and the latter some 30 or 40. In the war, Finland becomes a more fractured society than in our timeline. Red and white tensions are high, and political terror is somewhat commonplace, until the late 20s, which sees the nation develop and grow wealthier. Come 1930, though, the stock market crash in America ripples to Finland, and tensions begin to rise again, leading here to a substantially more popular fascist movement in the early 30s than in our timeline. Nevertheless, the fascists don't take over the government, and Finland remains a parliamentary democracy, with some careful unitary politics from the president at the time after one or another fascist overstep. Come late 1939, the Winter War begins and honestly goes much as in our timeline. Perhaps there is some internal Finnish dissidence in the recruitment process, but even the socialists at the time held enough national pride to not want to become a Soviet republic, and thus Finland retains its ultimate independence, though losing the Winter War. The only major difference to be noted is a strengthened fascist resolve within Finland, as the electoral fascist party, the EKL, earns some 15% of the popular vote in the 1940 elections and is invited to the government. In the meanwhile, on the European theatre, the Germans are doing whatever they need to bring about victory over the Western Allies in the early years of the war. Let's suppose, in short, more German strategic successes in Dunkirk, for example, and more British follies in, for example, Churchill not rising to power. Be as it all may, Germany is at peace with the West by 1941, come time for Barbarossa. As the Germans invade the Soviet Union, so do the Finns begin the continuation war. With the increased fascist support within Finland, general notions of the war shift from being one of reclamation to one of rightful conquest. In our timeline, see, the Finns were wary of sieging Leningrad or marching too far into Russian Karelia, because generally the populace didn't want to conquer the so-called rightful lands, but reclaim the ones lost in the Winter War. Here that is different, and with some more German successes in 1941 Barbarossa, actually sieging Leningrad and not diverting army group center from Moscow, the way is paved for the Finns to conquer Eastern Karelia and Germany, Russia. Indeed, we shall suppose an Axis victory in this timeline. By 1950 at the latest, the Soviets are totally done for, as the Germans have pushed the fracturing nation to the Urals, and victory is declared. Finland officially annexes Eastern Karelia and the Kola Peninsula, giving us the majority of our desired lands. Over the next decade, German diplomacy brings Norway and Sweden into the Axis fold, and eventually into full incorporation with Germany. During this time, Finland is awarded the region spoken of earlier in the northwest, and thus we have our Finland. Probably quite the fascistic hell in quite the fascistic world, but hey, at least it's greater.